Hello my friends, Hank here, and in this video, I'll show you how I built up this simple little Battle of Kursk Eastern Front trench diorama using a handful of materials you can easily gather at home or at your local hardware store. We'll start today with this general base shape I carved out of XPS foam using my hot wire cutter. This footage here is from a different dio project, but the technique is the same. If you don't have a hot wire cutter at home, you can carve the desired shape out with a hobby knife, just be very careful, of course. Importantly, this step is entirely up to your artistic discretion. You can really use whatever shape you want to act as the skeleton of your project, so to speak. To start the transformation of this pink foam into some realistic looking terrain, we'll begin by spreading some plaster of Paris all over our diorama base. We want to be sure that we're getting complete coverage on all the top surfaces of the base, and we can leave the jagged sides of the base untouched. I sort of like that sliced out look for my vignettes and dios. Once our plaster is applied and still wet, let's sprinkle a bit of sand all over our base to add some texture. We don't want to go too heavy because this isn't a beach or a desert, but we want to add enough that that groundwork looks a little bit more like dirt and less like, well, dried plaster. While that plaster is still wet, let's add some logs to reinforce our trench revetments here. Operation Citadel, the German offensive in what would become the pivotal Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943, was at its core an effort by German forces to pinch off and close a massive salient, some 20,000 square miles in size, that had developed along the Eastern Front. In preparation for what no doubt would become an intense combined arms assault, the Soviets dug over 5,700 miles of trenches zigzagging across the salient, which is hard to even wrap your head around. These trenches littered the battlefield, and each in itself became a deadly obstacle to be captured in the brutal assaults and counter-assaults that raged across the front. To add some character and structural integrity to our section of trench, we'll use some sticks and twigs that I collected for a previous diorama project to line the trench walls. We'll also use some broken up bits of popsicle stick to build out a walkway at the bottom of the trench and simulate some boards liberated from a nearby building. And for a few extra details, let's drop in some of these resin accessories from Value Gear in case our German infantry need a few extra grenades. You never know. With the basic structure of our groundwork complete, let's move on to crafting a bit of barbed wire while the plaster has time to dry. I do have a full tutorial on how to make scale barbed wire segments that I will link to right here if you'd like to pause and check it out. And as always, I'll have links down in the description below to all the materials we use in today's build. With our plaster now dry and our little segment of barbed wire manufactured, let's install it by poking a couple of holes through the groundwork and securing 2 wire posts with a bit of superglue. And at this stage, we can finally move on to some painting. We'll begin, as always, by priming our whole diorama with a coat of black primer to give us a nice even base to work up from. When I work with XPS foam and plaster, I like to add an extra coat of gloss varnish after the primer coat to help lock everything in place. I find that this helps prevent some of our little bits of sand and other earthworks from dislodging from the base during the rest of the painting process. Painting earthworks in terrain is really an exercise in intentional inconsistency, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But when you think about it, dirt, soil, rocks, the general makeup of the ground that we walk on, it's not all the same color. It's a million different little tones and shades. So when I build up terrain dioramas like this, I like to build up a bunch of different light coats of color, some lighter, some darker, to help simulate this reality of inconsistency. Little bits of each layer we apply are going to poke through in some places, be covered completely in others, and at the end of the day, it's going to create a nice, natural, realistic-looking ground effect. It can be helpful to visualize how the earth you're trying to replicate would behave while you paint. For berms and trenches, for example, we have to imagine that some of the more recently exposed dirt might be a little darker and richer in color, while some of the terrain that's been untouched for a while might be a bit more dried out and lighter. The nice thing about this whole process, honestly, is that you're not gonna break anything. Experiment, pile up some color, play with some color, build up some texture. If you hate a particular section, you can always just come back and repaint it. No big deal at all. Before we move on to the rest of our earth effects, let's transition over to some brush painting work. We're first going to hit our barbed wire with a bit of white aluminum to help pop that a bit and separate it from the earth below. Next, using various browns and tans, let's go around and give some color to all of our planking and our revetment logs. Again, there are no hard and fast rules to how you approach this. Just stick to natural tones, pick out a log or a plank, and add some color. Variation is key. Bounce between a few different paints and play with some dry brushing to help make these look a little less like monocolored tubes and more like actual logs. And once we've got some of those details picked out, here is where we're going to really start to bring it all together. We're looking great right now, but the earthworks look a little flat and lifeless. A few washes are going to really help us breathe some life into this piece. We're going to start with some of this enamel streaking grime and use a liberal amount of thinner to help it flow freely around the textures of our groundwork. This does cover up a lot of the previous paintwork we did, but that is the desired effect, at least for me. Again, we want just little glimpses of color variation peeking through in every tiny little bit of this diorama. We want it to look natural. To add darker, more earthy effects to the walls and the fresh soil of our trench, we can add some dark wash along the revetments. And for a final pass of washes, we're going to add some of this Kursk soil. Fitting. Now, when we put this on here, it's going to look crazy bright. Fear not. When we thin it out a bit with our odorless thinner, and it dries completely, it's going to give us a nice dry soil tone at the very top of our terrain that captures the summer heat and grit of the battlefields around Kursk. And for an extra textural effect, we can add some Russian earth pigment to the bottom of our trench and around the earthworks and secure it with a bit of thinned out PVA glue and tap water. And at this stage, let's walk away and let this all dry completely overnight. And after all of our work is settled, we can see that this is really starting to look great. But of course, we've got a few more things to tackle before we can call this complete. Let's get in here nice and close with some fine brushes and detail up these resin accessories. Alright, with our crates and grenades looking good, let's go around the outside of the diorama with some flat black and just touch up the sides of the base to cover up any runoff product or fingerprints we might have accidentally created during the rest of the process. Next, we're going to hit the whole diorama with another coat of gloss varnish to seal in our paint and weathering work so far. We can then hit the raised flat portions of our dio with a coat of matte varnish. The target here is to keep the insides and walls of the trench looking a bit glossier and wet than the outside undisturbed portions of the trench. When our varnishes have cured, we can start to prep for adding a little bit of grass to our piece. Let's brush some PVA glue thinned way down with tap water all over the portions of our diorama where we want to plant some grass, so to speak. And while that glue mixture is still wet, we can sprinkle on as much or as little static grass as we want. Don't worry about making too much of a mess. Once this dries, we can take it outside or over a garbage can and blow off any of the excess. And while our grass settles, let's prep some final tiny little details. I want the focal point of this piece to be this MG34 gunner, so we're going to create some spent brass to sprinkle all over the trench next to him. Using some of that same fine brass wire we used back for our barbed wire, let's snip some pieces to approximately the correct length of spent 8mm Mauser casings. With our grass fully settled, it's now time to start deploying our figures into our trench. These are all Tamiya figures from a couple different sets that I've painted up over the years. I'll link to my full tutorial on painting up Wehrmacht infantry uniforms right here if you would like to check it out. And for our absolute final touch, let's apply some more of that PVA glue mixture next to our machine gunner and sprinkle those casings that we made into our trench. And finally, we have ourselves a beautiful little Battle of Kursk diorama using all basic materials we can get around the house or from our local hardware store. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and got some inspiration for your own projects, and if you'd like to check out any of the materials we used today, I'll have a full list of everything down in the description below. Until next time, my friends, be well, happy building, cheers.